Frederick, Colorado. A quiet town cradled in the open stretch of Weld County. Suburban streets, rows of newly built homes, clean sidewalks, pickup trucks parked on driveways, families getting by, people who knew each other by name. On one of those streets was a home at 2825 Saratoga Trail. Gray siding, white trim, a welcoming porch, a swing in the backyard. That house belonged to the Watts family. Chris Watts, 33. Shanann Watts, 34. Married, parents of 2 little girls. Bella, age 4, Celeste, 3, and Shanann, pregnant with their 3rd. A boy they already named Nico. From the outside, they had everything. The smiles in photographs, the family, vacations, the Facebook posts full of affection and gratitude. Shanann was thriving in a health and wellness company. Chris worked in the oil fields. They lived what many would call the American dream. But on the morning of August 13th, that dream shattered. Shanann had returned from a business trip in the early hours. Her friend Nicole dropped her off just before 2. She was tired, pregnant, but glad to be home. Hours later, no one heard from her. She missed a doctor's appointment. She didn't text. She didn't call. That was unusual, very unusual. Nicole became worried. She went back to the house, knocked. No answer. She called. Still nothing. The car was parked in the garage. The front door locked. Inside the home, there was no sound. She called the police. Officers arrived for a welfare check. The body cam began. Recording. Chris showed up minutes later. He looked calm, polite, cooperative. He said Shanann had mentioned going to a friend's place. He said maybe she left with the kids, maybe she needed some time. The officer listened. He asked to look around. Chris agreed. They stepped inside. Shanann's phone was in the couch, her purse on the kitchen island, her medication untouched, the girl's car seat still strapped in the vehicle. The sheets were stripped from the master bed, and the silence in that house was too complete, not peaceful, empty. Something was off. It felt off. Chris gave statements. He spoke to the media. He asked the public for help. He smiled on camera. He asked his wife and daughters to come home. But behind his eyes, there was nothing. A neighbor offered his surveillance footage. It showed Chris backing his truck into the garage early that morning, loading something, multiple trips, something heavy. He said it was tools. His explanation did not match the footage, or the timing, or the tone of his voice. Then came the questions, the contradictions, the polygraph, and finally the break. Chris confessed. He told investigators he killed Shanann, that he strangled her in their bed, that Bella and Celeste walked in afterward, that they asked what was wrong, that he told them nothing, that he drove Shanann's body in the truck with the girls, alive in the back seat. He said he killed them one by one, that Bella fought, that she begged, that she knew, and that he dumped their bodies in crude oil tanks, left Shanann in a shallow grave nearby, then went to work. The police arrested him 3 days after the disappearance. No struggle, no resistance, just a man with hollow eyes, a man who wore a mask of normal for far too long, and underneath it, something far more disturbing. He pled guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder. One for each of his daughters, one for Shanann, one for their unborn child, and an additional count for the unlawful termination of that pregnancy. He would never see freedom again. He would never face a jury. The trial never came. He simply told the truth, at least part of it, but the questions never stopped. What led to that moment? What was the truth inside that house in the days and weeks before? How did a man go from bedtime stories to silence, from family photos to murder, from holding his daughters to smothering them? This story is not just about what he did. It is about what people missed. It is about what lived beneath the surface. It is about how manipulation hides in plain sight. Over the next hour, we will retrace the days, the moments, the choices. We will hear Shanann's voice. We will follow the Investigation. We will step into the interviews, into the bedroom, into the truck, into the oil field. And we will try to answer what no one could imagine. Why would a father do this? Why would a husband pretend? Why did no one see it coming? And how many others wear the same smile before the headlines, before the search, before the footage of a father? Bleeding on television, there was a family that looked like any other. Smiles, birthdays, road trips, a house full of children's laughter. Social media told one story, one that seemed almost too perfect. Shanann Watts was a woman who shared her life openly. She posted often, videos of her daughters playing, messages to her husband, product launches, testimonials, dance parties in the living room. She was confident, organized, bright. But her story did not begin with ease. Born in Passaic, New Jersey, raised in North Carolina, she battled health challenges for much of her adult life. Diagnosed with lupus, she spoke often about how it changed her, how it tested her, how it made her more grateful. She found purpose in health and wellness. She worked for a company called Thrive. She marketed supplements. Her schedule was full, calls, coaching, conferences, but she loved it. She loved her family more. Chris Watts entered her life quietly. He was calm, kind. He worked as an operator at Anadarko Petroleum. They married in 2012, moved to Colorado, bought a house in Frederick. Life began to settle. They welcomed Bella in 2013. Celeste followed 2 years later. Both girls had wide smiles. Bella was thoughtful, curious, protective of her younger sister. Celeste was wild with energy. Her laugh was contagious. They loved to dress up, sing songs, cling to their mother. Shanann documented everything. First steps, birthday parties, matching outfits, family dinners, her Instagram filled with affection, Facebook flooded with messages. Her captions praised Chris. She called him the best dad, the kindest man. She posted videos of him coloring with the girls, tucking them into bed, kissing Shanann's growing belly. To the outside world, this was love, real, lasting. A unit that could weather anything. But there were signs, subtle, quiet, almost invisible. Chris began to withdraw, slowly. He said less, texted less. The warmth in his voice began to fade. Shanann noticed. She told friends. She wrote him letters. She said she missed the man she married. She said he was different. He said he was tired. He said work was stressful. He said nothing was wrong, but something was. During a family vacation in North Carolina in the summer of 2018, things shifted. Shanann went ahead with the girls. Chris stayed behind. When he joined them later, he was distant, cold. Their conversations were short. He did not hold her. He did not laugh with the girls the way he used to. Shanann felt it. Her texts to friends became anxious, confused. She said she felt alone in her marriage. She said something had changed. And she was right. In one message she wrote, "He kissed me once at the airport. That was the last time." Her friend responded, "Do you think there's someone else?" Shanann hesitated before answering, but her words carried weight. "I don't know. I feel like he's not in love with me anymore." Still, she tried. She returned home. She planned for the baby. She announced the pregnancy to Chris with a video, a small sign that read, "Oops, we did it again." Chris smiled, but it was slight, forced. The reaction did not match the moment, not for a father hearing he would have a son. In her final weeks, Shanann became more vocal about her fears. She began confiding in close friends. She said Chris was pushing her away, that he was cold in bed, that he no longer called her sweetheart, that he seemed obsessed with fitness, that he barely looked her in the eye. At the same time, Chris was changing. He was working out more, eating less, texting constantly. He started sleeping in the basement. He said it was because he did not want to wake her. But she knew something was wrong. Her gut told her. She just did not have the proof. Yet through all of this, she kept posting. She smiled through the silence. She danced with her daughters. She made videos for her team. She held on to hope. She believed the man she married was still there. On August 11th, 2018, she flew to Arizona for a business trip. She texted Chris from the airport. He barely responded. While she was gone, he hired a babysitter. He went out. He told Shanann he was at a baseball game. That was a lie. He was with someone else, a woman named Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker, someone he met months earlier, someone who thought he was separating from his wife, someone who believed his marriage was ending. That Sunday, Shanann boarded her return flight. She texted Chris one last time before landing. "I love you." He did not reply. She arrived home at 1:48 in the morning. Her friend Nicole dropped her off. The porch light was on. The house was still. Her suitcase rolled quietly across the floor. That would be the last time anyone saw Shanann alive. The next morning, Nicole texted. Shanann did not answer. She called. No reply. She went to the house, knocked on the door, rang the bell. Nothing. She called Chris. He said Shanann had taken the girls to a play date, but her car was still in the garage. Her shoes were inside, her medication untouched, her phone silent. Nicole did not believe him. She called the police, and with that call, the story changed. The house that once held laughter was now filled with questions. The father who once posed for photos was now avoiding them. The family that once looked complete was now missing, and what investigators would uncover next would shake the nation to its core. But before they could find the truth, they had to piece together the lies, and it started with surveillance. It began with the silence that morning on August 13th, 2018. No laughter from the backyard, no clinking of breakfast dishes, no voices of a mother calming her daughters. Instead, there was stillness, a quiet that never accompanied a missing family. Shanann had not arrived for her doctor's appointment, and that raised alarm. She was 15 weeks pregnant. She had driven herself home in darkness only hours earlier. She was never late. She was never without her phone. But now her phone lay unseen within the cushions of her own couch. Her purse rested undisturbed on the kitchen island. Her shoes remained neatly beside the front door. The girls' seats stayed locked in their silver SUV. Their dog, once bouncing at the door, roamed the empty rooms as if he, too, had sensed something was wrong. Her friend Nicole had sensed danger. She called the police. She felt it in her bones. And when patrol officers arrived, the calm facade of the Watts home cracked under scrutiny. Chris Watts returned home while police were inside. His movements were calm. He answered their questions. He gave them space. He spoke in answers that were borderline rehearsed. He told them he believed Shanann had taken the children to a friend's house. He spoke as if he was a worried dad, a hurt husband, but his voice carried no tremor. His eyes held no tears. His posture was rigid. He scanned the room. He touched nothing. It was as though he was watching himself, performing for an audience he could not see. "Are you sure she didn't leave with the kids?" the officer asked. And Chris replied, "Yes, I think so." They moved through quiet rooms. No toys, no paperwork, no sign of any ordinary morning. They paused by the couch. They saw the phone wedged deep in the cushions. They felt the tension rise. Chris stood a few feet away, his hands folded in front of him. He gazed into the distance. He told them he had no idea where she was. He spoke as though he believed himself, but parts of the story did not fit together. Then came the neighbor's footage. Grainy at first, a single angle on the driveway. But what it captured was enough. Chris's truck rolling into view early that morning. It backed in. He opened the tailgate, walked to the garage, then back again to the tailgate. 3 times. He carried something, dark and heavy. The camera didn't show what it was, but the gestures were clear. Something was moved. Something was hidden. Something mattered. Chris had said he drove to work. He had said he believed his family was safe somewhere else. He had said he loved them. But the footage said another story. The footage raised more questions than answers. Why was he shuttling something inside over and over again? What was he hiding? What had happened before he walked through the door? By evening, a crowd had gathered outside the house. Yellow tape. It wrapped around the front yard. Flashing lights reflected on the pavement. Reporters held cameras. Microphones hovered. They asked him about Shanann. They asked about Bella. They asked about Celeste. They asked if he loved them. He said he did. He said he wanted them home. He spoke of happy memories. He stayed calm. The slightest twitch of discomfort crossed his face. But his words did not. He break. He did not beg for forgiveness. He did not fall to his knees. He did not crumble in grief. He remained still. Behind him, a white SUV held the girls' car seats. They sat empty like unanswered questions. Inside, investigators began digging deeper. They poured through text messages, emails, search history, bank records. They noticed deleted files. They discovered calls between Chris and someone named Nickel. They noted gaps of time, phone ping locations, the building blocks of an investigation, chains of evidence forming. They knew that everything was being recorded. Every move, every call, every step. They knew those recordings would hold the truth. What Chris Watts did not yet know was that time was slipping, that his calm disguise was fading, that the walls of his perfect life were collapsing around him, even as he walked through them, because nothing stays silent forever, and everything leaves a trail. The town of Frederick had barely begun to comprehend the fear creeping into their quiet streets when the investigation picked up momentum. Chris Watts stood in front of news cameras, his face calm, his voice steady, pleading for the return of his wife and daughters. "If you're out there, just come back," he said, looking into the lens as though trying to reach Shanann through the screen. "I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here." His words were carefully chosen. He seemed collected. But detectives were already paying attention to something else. His eyes, his posture, the way his arms folded tightly across his chest, the absence of panic. It did not match the gravity of what had happened. The search for Shanann, Bella, and Celeste was already underway. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers gathered. Flyers went up. The house was quiet, too quiet. Investigators reviewed the footage from a neighbor's security camera. The video showed Chris backing his work truck into the driveway in the early morning hours, just before sunrise, far earlier than his usual departure time. The truck sat there for several minutes. Then he was seen moving back and forth from the house to the vehicle. Chris claimed he was just loading tools. But no one ever saw Shanann or the girls leaving the house. When the police watched the footage, they made no immediate accusations. But one neighbor leaned closer to the officers and said quietly when Chris had left the room, "He's not acting, right? He never talks that much. He never backs his truck in like that." Chris said he had no idea where his wife could have gone. He said maybe she left with the kids. Maybe she was upset. Maybe she was somewhere cooling off, but he did not ask questions. He did not mention anyone she might have called. He didn't offer names. The concern that most people would feel, the desperation to know who saw her last, was missing. At the Watts residence, the search became more invasive. Officers noticed Shanann's car in the garage, her purse still inside, her phone found between the couch cushions, her medications left behind. The children's blankets were gone, but their favorite toys, the ones they clung to every night, were untouched. Then came the dogs. Specially trained cadaver dogs entered the house to search for the scent of human decomposition. It did not take long. The dogs alerted in multiple areas. They lingered in the garage. They sniffed around the driver's side of Chris's truck. They paused at the entrance to the basement. The silence grew heavier. Detectives began requesting interviews. They asked Chris to walk them through the morning, again and again. Each time the words matched, but the delivery felt rehearsed. The smallest details were vague. What had Shanann said when she came home? Did he see her go to bed? What time did he leave for work? The longer Chris spoke, the more the gaps appeared. The public saw a husband grieving, but investigators saw a man growing quieter when asked about his children. They saw a man unwilling to take a polygraph until finally he agreed. But even then, something shifted in the room. The examiner leaned in and told him plainly before they began, "Chris, right now your answers will matter more than ever. If you had nothing to do with this is your chance to show it." Chris nodded, but his answers told another story. The results were not what he hoped. "You failed the polygraph," the agent told him, "and now we need to talk about what really happened." That moment marked a turning point. The questions grew more direct. The walls of the interrogation room felt smaller, and Chris, for the first time, asked to speak to his father. When the door closed and it was just the two of them, Chris looked down. His voice broke. He said he had lied. He said he had done something terrible. But what he told them next would take even seasoned detectives by surprise, and no one watching could have prepared for the truth that was coming. For weeks, Chris Watts had carried a secret. It was quiet, it was calculated, and it was one he believed he could keep hidden behind the mask of a grieving husband. But investigators were closing in, and what they began to uncover pulled the case into a chilling new direction. Nickel Kessinger, a name that would soon appear in national headlines, a geologist, a co-worker, and according to Chris, someone who had brought light into his life when everything else felt heavy. He met Nickel at Anadarko Petroleum, where they both worked. What began as small conversations between co-workers soon became private messages, phone calls, and rendezvous that Chris carefully concealed from Shanann and everyone around them. By late June, text messages between Chris and Nickel had grown more intimate. Photos were exchanged, plans were made. Chris spoke of a future unburdened by the stress of his current life. Nickel, unaware of the depth of his deception, believed he was already in the process of separating from his wife. He told her the marriage was broken, that they were living apart, that divorce was imminent. But Shanann's phone told a different story. While Chris was building a parallel life, Shanann was pouring her energy into salvaging the one they had. She sent him emotional messages. She told him she loved him. She asked why he seemed distant. The change in Chris had not gone unnoticed. In texts to her friends, Shanann described a man who had become cold, unrecognizable. She worried he no longer loved her. She begged him to talk to her, to tell her what was going on. Shanann's final days were spent trying to piece together what had changed. She planned a romantic getaway. She arranged for counseling, but Chris, consumed by his secret, remained emotionally detached. While she was in North Carolina visiting her family, Chris stayed behind. He spent that time with Nickel. They went on dates, they laughed, they shared intimate moments, some of which Nickel would later recount in detail to detectives after Shanann. And the girls returned home. Chris continued to see Nickel. He lied. He said he was working late. He said he needed time to think. But behind those excuses was a man growing increasingly desperate to keep two lives from colliding. On August 13th, the day Shanann was reported missing, Nickel tried to reach Chris. He seemed off, distant. In the following days, Nickel began to sense something was wrong. When she saw his TV interviews pleading for his family's return, she felt uneasy. The man she had come to know was calm, controlled, but in those interviews, something didn't feel right. His eyes avoided the camera. His words felt rehearsed. She came forward. She told investigators everything. She handed over her phone, her internet searches, her messages. She was cooperative, she was emotional, and she was shocked. She admitted she had begun to suspect he was not being honest. The moment she realized his family had not just vanished, she understood her name would be part of a story she never signed up for. Detectives examined phone records, search histories, and location data. Nickel had Googled information about Shanann, about wedding dresses, about Amber Frey, about how much money Amber had made after her involvement with Scott Peterson. Investigators began piecing together the emotional atmosphere around the affair. Chris had told her one thing, but the evidence said another. By now, detectives had grown increasingly suspicious of Chris. His stories were inconsistent. His timeline did not add up. Surveillance footage from the neighbor's home contradicted his version of events, and now a new layer had emerged, one that cast doubt over everything he had said. The picture of a man struggling with marital stress was being replaced with one of a man meticulously planning a new life. A life without his wife, without his children, without responsibility. Then came the polygraph test. A simple question. "Did you physically harm Shanann?" Chris answered. And the examiner knew instantly he was not telling the truth. Investigators paused. They looked him in the eye, and they said what he never expected to hear. "Chris, we know you're lying." The walls were closing in, and Chris Watts, the man who once begged for the safe return of his family, was about to tell a story no one could have imagined. The pressure had been mounting. Every word Chris spoke was under a microscope. Investigators were watching his body, language, listening to the cracks in his voice, measuring every second of hesitation. Then came the polygraph. He sat in a small room, alone. The examiner sat across from him, calm, steady, direct. "Did you physically harm Shanann?" Chris said no, but the charts told another story. He failed completely. There was no ambiguity. He had not told the truth. When the examiner left the room and detectives returned, they were no longer asking. They were telling. "Chris, we know you're lying." It was the first time his face truly changed, the first sign that the story he had so carefully maintained was about to unravel. He asked to speak with his father, Ronnie Watts. And when Ronnie walked into the interrogation room, the Chris that greeted him was not the calm husband from the television cameras. This Chris was hunched forward, quiet. He whispered, he cried, he told his father a story, one that shifted the blame. He said Shanann had killed the girls, that in a fit of rage after learning of his affair, she had done something unforgivable, and that he, in response, had killed her. Investigators listened, they took notes, but they knew the story did not match the evidence. There were no signs that Shanann had harmed anyone, no defensive wounds, no struggle, and as more pressure mounted, the truth began to emerge. The full story. In a confession recorded by detectives, Chris finally admitted what he had done. In the early hours of August 13th, he had waited for Shanann to return from her business trip. They had argued. She had gone to bed. The next morning, he confronted her. He straddled her. He told her he wanted a separation. And as her panic rose, he pressed down. He strangled Shanann in the bed they once shared. Bella and Celeste were just down the hall. They heard something. They knew something was wrong. When Shanann was dead, Chris wrapped her in a sheet. He dragged her body down the stairs. And all the while, Bella asked, "Is Mommy okay?" He loaded the body into his truck. Then he put the two girls into the back seat, alive. No crying, no screaming, just silence. He drove them to an oil field owned by Anadarko, petroleum over 40 minutes away. During the ride, Bella clutched her favorite blanket. Celeste said nothing. When they arrived, he laid Shanann's body on the ground. Then he turned to Celeste. He smothered her with a blanket, quietly, methodically. She didn't resist, she didn't scream. And then it was Bella's turn. The girl who had always been the most observant, the most sensitive, the one who had seen too much. She asked him a final question. "Daddy, are you going to do the same thing to me as you did to Cece?" It was the last thing she ever said. After both girls were dead, Chris placed their bodies inside two separate oil tanks. Small openings, dark interiors. Their bodies were submerged in crude oil. Shanann was buried nearby in a shallow grave. Autopsy reports would later confirm the horrifying details. The girls had bruising consistent with smothering. Oil was found in their lungs and stomachs. Shanann's autopsy revealed she was 15 weeks pregnant. Her unborn son, Nico, died with her. Courtroom recordings captured the rest. Chris, now shackled and pale, sat silently as prosecutors described every act. Shanann's family listened. They cried. They held each other. Chris never looked at them. He kept his eyes forward, expressionless. When asked why, he had no answer. He claimed he had snapped, that he had been trapped, that he wanted a new life, but nothing he said could account for the horror of what he had done, the complete annihilation of a family who had loved him. And so, with a heavy silence, in courtroom, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all counts, to every murder, to every lie. He was sentenced to life in prison. Without the possibility of parole, he would never walk free again. And the names Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico would never be forgotten. Their photos still hang in the home where they once laughed, where they once played, where they once lived. But the man who destroyed that world now sits alone, in a cell, without them, forever. By the time the public saw Chris Watts in a courtroom, he was no longer the man many had watched in TV interviews. The soft voice, the folded hands, the scripted pleas, all of it had fallen away. Now, seated beside his defense attorneys, he wore a county-issued jumpsuit, shackled at the ankles, head low, a father, a husband, a confessed murderer. The courtroom was silent as the judge entered. The prosecution read aloud the charges. First-degree murder of Shanann Watts. First-degree murder of Bella Watts. First-degree murder of Celeste Watts. Unlawful termination of a pregnancy. Tampering with a deceased human body. Each word echoed off the walls. Shanann's family sat in the front row, their faces pale, their eyes red. Chris spoke only once. He pled guilty. He offered no conditions, no explanations, no attempt to lessen the weight of what he had done. The judge asked if he understood what that meant. Chris nodded. And in that moment, justice began to take shape. Before the sentence was handed down, Shanann's family was given a chance to speak. Her father, Frank Ruchek, stood first. His voice trembled. He talked about Shanann as a daughter, as a mother, as someone who had trusted Chris completely. He spoke of Bella's sweet voice and Celeste's laughter, and of the unborn child, Nico, who never had the chance to take a first breath. Then came Shanann's mother. Her words were quiet, but strong. She talked about the cruelty of it, the betrayal, the emptiness left behind. Chris never turned to look at them. He never met their eyes. The judge addressed the court. He called the crimes horrific, beyond comprehension. He told Chris that he had committed the most severe offense under Colorado law, that he had not only taken lives, but had done so with calculation, with intent, with a disregard for the people who had trusted him most. He sentenced Chris Watts to 5 life terms, 3 without the possibility of parole, 2 to be served consecutively, 48 additional years for unlawful termination of a pregnancy, 36 years for tampering with bodies. Chris was led away in silence. He would never again be a free man, but even after the sentencing, the story did not end. Nicole Kessinger, the woman Chris had been having an affair with, went into hiding. She changed her name, moved, vanished from public life. In her interviews with police, she had claimed she never knew Shanann was pregnant, that Chris had said he was finalizing a separation. Investigators found no evidence she had prior knowledge of the murders, but her role in the story left the public with questions. Some believed her, others did not. Media outlets flooded with interviews, documentaries, expert panels. The Watts case gripped the nation. People dissected every text message, every recorded statement, every surveillance frame. They asked why no one saw the signs, why Shanann's friends had sensed something was off, but not this. Why Chris had chosen murder over divorce, and how a man could look into the eyes of his children and choose to end their lives. Some theorized that it had all been premeditated, that from the moment Shanann returned from her trip, Chris had already made his decision. Others believed something inside him broke, that he snapped under the weight of a double life. But even with a confession, not all questions had answers. Years later, in prison interviews, Chris offered more details. Small ones. Inconsistencies remained. He claimed to be haunted by Bella's voice, by what she said. He said he prays for forgiveness, that he still dreams of his family. But the truth was already written, in autopsies, in timelines, in GPS data. In tears, the Watts family home stood vacant for years, a place once filled with children's voices, birthday balloons, family dinners, now quiet, the remnants of a life extinguished. And across America, the story lingers. A reminder that evil does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it lives behind familiar doors, smiling in photographs, holding a child's hand. The name Chris Watts is now etched in the collective memory of a nation, not as a father, not as a husband, but as the man who destroyed his own world. And the names Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico live on, as victims, as memories, as proof that no mask can hide the truth forever. The murder of the Watts family shook the conscience of a country, but beyond the crime itself, it revealed something even more terrifying, that some of the darkest acts can grow in the most familiar spaces, behind carefully filtered social media posts, behind words like "everything is fine," behind the silence of those too afraid to speak. Shanann was not just a wife or a mother, she was a woman who fought for her health, who loved loudly, who trusted. Bella and Celeste were daughters full of life, curious, innocent. Nico never got the chance to open his eyes. Their names are remembered, their stories told. This case reminds us to ask the hard questions, to look beneath the surface, to not dismiss the quiet signs, because sometimes the truth lives in the smallest changes. The distance in a hug, the absence in a smile, and even now, years later, people are still asking, were the signs always there? Could something have changed the outcome? Was there a moment where this could have stopped? You decide. We will be posting in-depth true crime stories every day. So if this case moved you, if these stories matter to you, subscribe, leave a comment, share your thoughts. In memory of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico Watts, gone but never forgotten.